Hello and welcome to day 24 of the Genesis of Androzani Advent Calendar for 2024. Today, in the penultimate video of this year's calendar, I am going to redo something that I did a few years ago. I am going to do an updated ranking of the Doctor Who companions. This, compared to last time, will include some of the characters that have appeared since. I have more context of some characters that were just current at the time. The other thing is I feel like I've trimmed out quite a few that were on the last list, and I sort of just included the ones that I really feel need and sort of kind of deserve to be on the list and kind of count as a companion rather than just a character. And on top of that, some of my opinions on the companions from the past has actually changed for better or worse since the last time I did this list. So I have more developed opinions. I've also seen all of Classic Who, so that also helps too. I won't be including anything from Big Finish or the books. This will be just the TV show. And I'm kind of doing it based on how much I like these companions as characters. I'm not necessarily doing it based on like how much they are a service or a friend to the Doctor necessarily, although that could play a part in what makes them a really good or bad character. But that's just kind of the mindset I have. It's not as mathematical as last time. I'm just kind of going off gut instinct more so. So yeah, there's 51 to get into, so let's not waste any more time and get into the list. My number 51 is Dan Lewis, played by John Bishop. What can I say? He's a lobotomized scouse. Just based on the scene where Carvanista is in his house and his house is ruined, and the way he reacts is genuinely insane. Kind of just sums up everything about him. Yeah, there's just not really anything good. The writing is awful. The acting is very fake and wooden. John Bishop feels like he's just a random guy who's walked on set and is just there. And the characterization just is just so sloppy, and I find Dan really annoying, and I find him very frustrating and irritating to watch. He may not be as lore damaging as one or two of the other companions on this list, but I think just overall there's no redeeming qualities to him. He's just terrible in every way. Annoying to watch, not funny, not interesting, insane characteristics, and he's from Series 13, which is one of my, if not, for me, the least favorite season of this show, which is a slight spoiler for a video I have planned, but you'll have to wait and see for that one. But yes, for me, Dan Lewis is the worst companion in Doctor Who. He now takes the wooden spoon. My number 50 is Yasmin Khan, played by Mandip Gill. This one is such wasted potential because having a police officer as a companion has so much that you could have done. And there's so many things that they could have really dug into and explored with her, and they just don't. On top of the fact that the characterization is like insanely crazy. Like early on, she's hardly a factor in Series 11. She barely gets anything to do and is very, very background, and even when she is featured in the stories, her morals are very misplaced. And then later on, once she becomes more prominent in Series 12, and especially Flux, her characterization goes off the rails. You get moments like dumping bodies over the side, or, you know, just weird logistical issues, and then of course you've got her crush on the Doctor, and yeah, it's just very strange. I also personally don't enjoy Mandip Gill's Hollyoaks tier acting. It works in a lowbrow soap opera, but for a show like Doctor Who, it sucks a lot of the life and the fun out of the show. And yeah, Yaz is very, very, very contentious and just shit all the way through. I mean, the characterization of her in Revolution of the Daleks, you know, the "you left me" sort of thing in Revolution, it does. Chibnall kind of tries to recreate that apprehension that Rose and that sort of confusion that Rose Tyler had in the Christmas Invasion over the Doctor's change. And with Yaz, it just doesn't come across right. It's very misplaced. And this, yeah, there's a lot of very bad dialogue, you know, Halloween, trick or treat. And there's a lot of just clashing elements when you've got such a bland and cardboard acting style mixed in with some very goofy and stupid lines. Not a fan of Yaz in the slightest. The episode Can You Hear Me also tries to force a depression angle on her and doesn't do it in a way that's earned or good or actually, you know, ties into the story in an effective way. And it doesn't thematically do much for the intention behind it either. My number 49 is Ryan Sinclair, played by Tosin Cole. Part of what really lacks in charm about Ryan Sinclair is the fact that Tosin Cole is forced to do a northern accent, and he delivers lines in the most monotone and stilted way. Just the whole... it's very weird seeing him be in scenes where he's allegedly emotional, and yet I can just sense no air of care in the world coming out of his voice. Oh, no way. Oh, I love me nan. Me nan was proper special. Like, it's almost like he's got just absolutely no external emotional inhibitor. It's just, he's bordering on Cyberman levels. Then, of course, you got the way, like, the just truly harmful and disrespectful way that Chibnall handles his dyspraxia arc very lazily and clumsily. On top of the fact that Ryan gets some of the cringiest lines, like in Spyfall when he's like pretending to be Logan, and it's just shudder and horror. And on top of that, I feel like out of the entire show, Ryan Sinclair has some of the least chemistry with the Doctor as well. Like the connection between 13 and Ryan is almost entirely non-existent, and it's very, very strange. And the best I can get out of Ryan is mostly small memes like, I got Chipster! Or, you know, I think he does have one or two pretty good scenes. The most notable one being at the end of It Takes You Away. There's actually something genuine in there that they never really capitalize on later. My number 48 is Clara Oswald, played by Jenna Coleman. So she used to be at the bottom of my list, and I think she is the most volatile, if not probably worse than that, because I feel like there's a lot more negatives than positives here. But I will say the reason why I don't put her at the bottom anymore, despite the fact that I think she has the worst moments as a companion in the show, is a couple of reasons. Unlike the ones below her, she actually has some full episodes where I consider her pretty good. Probably Flatline being one of her best, and Face the Raven as well. Another reason why is that Jenna Coleman and her performance, while she certainly has a smug, bitchy face, to be honest, she's a very powerful performer, and especially her coming off Peter Capaldi, they have a lot of very captivating energy with each other, and that does add something to the character that the Chibnall ones really don't have. And that's kind of it, really, because apart from that, I think Clara is an utter clusterfuck disaster and some of the worst writing Stephen Moffat's ever done in his career. From, you know, Oswin to The Impossible Girl to The Leaf to the way that she finds out the Doctor's name in Journey, the Center of the TARDIS, to the way that her part to play in Gallifrey coming back, to the way that she convinces the Time Lords to resurrect the Doctor, to her reaction to regeneration, Deep Breath. Then you got Listen with her under the bed. You've got Death in Heaven with her. You got Last Christmas, which is also terrible. You've got stuff like The Girl Who Died, The Girl Who Died, where her characterization is really piss poor. And then, of course, the magnum opus of shit being Hellbent, which is just the most insulting writing for a companion there's ever been in the show, and I've spoken about it at length many times over the last 9 years. And then, of course, Twice Upon a Time certainly doesn't help with the Doctor just remembering her anyway, so rendering all of the loss meaningless for sentimental Christmas value. Apparently, don't get it twisted, she is still one of the worst characters in the show, but I think that it's more so a case of Chris Chibnall has somehow discovered lower levels of garbage out of his characters and not adding any redeeming qualities, which Clara may have a few of those, whereas the ones below her have pretty much zero. And that's kind of my take on it. My number 47 is Graham O'Brien. I mean, kind of one of the only reasons why this is ranked above the others is because of Bradley Walsh. For the most part, as an actor, he adds a likability and an endearment to this character. I do also think there's a couple of nice scenes with him, especially in Series 11, like the speech at Grace's funeral, or when he can, you know, smell her clothes in Arachnids in the UK and he can sort of sense her still around even though she's no longer with him. But having said that, there's also some other moments of him that are truly diabolical. Probably the worst of the worst coming in, like, Can You Hear Me, with the cancer scene with the doctor, and then of course in The Timeless Children, where he claims Yaz to be the most impressive woman he's ever met, and the rationale behind it is just non-existent and very pale. I think Graham is a very, very weak character and lacks in almost every regard in terms of writing, but as I said, Bradley Walsh elevates him above being utterly, utterly, utterly terrible. Something like, you know, akin to something like a Yaz or a Dan, which are worse by comparison. I also find that a lot of the comedy scenes with Graham really cringy and childish, and I'm not a fan of it. My number 46, it's a bit of a hot take for some people, it's River Song. Where do I start with this? This is such a strange character to dissect. I like her start with Tennant in Silence in the Library, Forest of the Dead, and apart from the continuity retcon error that Will and I discussed in a previous video on the calendar, I do like a lot of what the Husbands of River Song gives us with River Song, with Capaldi. However, all of her appearances with Matt Smith, I do not care for her character. I don't like her sense of humor. I don't like her characterization. I don't like the sexual tones. I don't like how she has these silly little lines that piss me off, like, Rule 1, the doctor lies. I don't like the way that, obviously, I think Alex Kingston is a fine person, but the way that she adds this sort of, probably down to direction from, you know, the set and also from Moffat's, you know, input, I find the way she does her spicy sort of like, ooh, spoilers, like just very, very yucky and icky, and I just have no interest in it. And probably the nadir of River Song and the absolute worst you get of it is Let's Kill Hitler and Wedding of River Song. That stuff just, it's some of the worst character writing the show's ever done. And we're supposed to believe that this is the woman the Doctor marries, and there's just a lot of ifs and buts and what the fuck's about that. There's certainly some interesting ideas that Moffat has borrowed from stuff like The Time Traveler's Wife, but I just think the execution, for the most part, especially during the Matt Smith era, really pisses me off. And of the Moffat girl stereotype, she is the most prominent one with all the traits that he really likes in a woman. And it's very just kind of a little bit disturbing, but it's certainly cringy. And I not a fan of River Song, her story, her characterization, her personality, none of it. It rubs me the wrong way. My number 45 is Chameleon. This is our first one from Classic Who. Chameleon's tricky because I actually like some aspects about him, especially in Planet of Fire. And, you know, there is something to this character. There are positives there. There is, you know, unique ideas within this character that are different to your average companion. However, unfortunately, this is just a case of not living up to the vision because they couldn't control him physically in the way that they wanted to, and it just kind of hampers his activity within stories like The King's Demons, especially the way he has to constantly sit down and he's very inactive and he has this placid look on his face. A lot of this just comes down to practicality, and it just kind of impacts him as an individual. However, I will say I do think that his death and how that impacts the Fifth Doctor, and despite the fact that he's not really a person, but yet the Doctor still cares about him, says a lot about, you know, the Fifth Doctor's arc and Chameleon's place in it. I just think that because, and I think they knew it at the time, Chameleon, they just couldn't get Chameleon to work, is why he doesn't appear as much as they would have liked him to. And yeah, this is kind of just an object failure, whereas, you know, I do really want to like Chameleon because I think there's good ideas within his character. I just don't think they do it as well as they could have overall. But yeah, again, I'll give props to Planet of Fire. They do some good stuff with him in that story, and that really elevates him above the others for me. My number 44 is Nardole by Matt Lucas. Nardole is weird. Weird to talk about. Weird to think about. Because I find him as a comedic presence, for the most part, annoying as fuck. Very, very comic relief, which kind of philosophically I have a bit of an opposition to characters that are purely comedic relief. But then again, once you get to stories like Oxygen onwards and they really develop the idea that Nardole is trying to protect the Doctor from himself, there is something really interesting in there. And obviously, you know, there's a couple of good lines in there, like an extremist, like, I have the authority to kick your ass. Or like the sacrifice he makes during his exit in The Doctor Falls. There's some positives in there, in the more serious moments, and the idea that he is kind of like the groundskeeper to the vault and the Doctor's study in the university while the Doctor goes out and does naughty traveling that he's not supposed to. You know, there's positives in there, but I just... Really, the thing that just irks me about Nardole is the jokes. I just don't like the jokes. I don't find Matt Lucas funny. I just don't care. And it's, yeah, it's annoying. It's a bit of a black mark on Series 10 for me. My number 43 is Dodo Chapelet by Jackie Lane. The main issue with Dodo is that her emotional core, it tends to be quite one-dimensional. She lacks that sense of understanding of what's around her. Kind of a similar thing to Dan, but not as extreme. Dan Lewis is exceedingly worse. Yeah, she's sort of, for a lot of her story, she is very chirpy and upbeat and childlike, but she lacks that humanity and that sort of ability to translate her emotions to the audience properly. I think also her entry into the show is rough, and her exit is also rough, because it's annoying, because I absolutely love the Massacre, and I absolutely love the War Machines, but the main issue I have with both of those stories is Dodo's entrance and exit, respectively, because apart from that, I love those episodes pretty much entirely, and it's just... She's kind of a thorn in the show's side for a bit. I will say she is done really well on the Gunfighters, but I almost suspect that the Gunfighters was written for Vicky first before they realized she was going to exit the show. I think that's highly possible. If not her, then maybe Sarah Kingdom, but I'm not sure. Again, it's tricky. I don't actually know the truth behind it. But yeah, Dodo isn't, like, she isn't outright garbage like some of the ones below her, but she is severely lacking in depth, and that really holds her back massively, even though she has a part to play in some stories that I do really enjoy watching. My number 42 is Grace Holloway by Daphne Ashbrook, a rare American companion, and an actual real American actress this time, as opposed to Nicola Bryant, who was British, but we'll get to her later. Grace Holloway she's a bit of an oddity. She only appears in the TV movie. I think there's some really fascinating aspects behind her character, but the main thing I will say is I feel like the ideas of having, you know, a medical doctor be the companion to the Doctor was done exceedingly better once we got to Martha Jones, and they actually capitalized on the parts of that connection that would work brilliantly. Whereas with Grace Holloway, they tend to choke with her a bit. I think Daphne Ashbrook is a good actress, but I think I actually prefer her in Big Finish when you get to stuff like The Next Life, where she plays a different role. She's really fun in that story. But in the TV movie, you know, I just think she's very... I don't even know what the word is to describe her. She's just quite... She's quite there, noisy, not too annoying, but just a weird presence in the story. But I do love some of the cinematography that I associate with Grace Holloway, in the sense that she's in that movie theater And then she gets the call to do surgery, and she does that. She's like, quick change into my uniform, like that. That sort of thing works. I like that, but it's just... Yeah, and also as the first character on TV that the Doctor actually has a romantic kiss with, it's just... I don't know about that. I feel like the romance in this is very Hollywood, and it doesn't tickle my fancy, to be honest. My number 41 is Kate Lethbridge-Stewart, played by Gemma Redgrave. I have struggled over the last 12 years with this character, and most of the time I feel like her writing and her characterization, to be honest, even her, the decisions they make behind her performance to an extent, they don't do justice to what you should be really looking for out of the daughter of the Brigadier, because, and it is a tricky situation, because Nicholas Courtney is one of the most charismatic actors the show's ever had, and living up to his standard is a very difficult task. Gemma Redgrave is able to play the stoic side of Kate well, but she's not a fun character, and she's not a presence that I particularly, enjoy. A lot of the time she's there, and she is functional. There's a couple of episodes in RTD2 that utilize her in better ways than she has been used before. I think the main characterization flaws I have with Kate Lethbridge-Stewart is in Flux. I think that Series 13 with Chibnall really does a lot of damage to Kate, especially Survivors of the Flux. There's a lot of very stupid things, like when she makes idle threats and then walks away when the danger is so critical. It really, sort of betrays what she's all about. Yeah, it's not like the negatives with Kate, apart from Flux, are like devastating. She's just a character that lacks in what should be there, and there's a lot of holes that aren't filled that would take her to the next level. And she's been through so many different doctors and showrunners, and just, she's been handled by so many different creatives, and yet they still, none of them seem to be able to fully crack the code with her. And that's a shame, because I think there was some wasted potential here to reignite this kind of unit presence in the show, like they had in Classic Who with the Brigadier. My number 40 is Ruby Sunday by Millie Gibson. Now, obviously, there's still time, because it's been revealed that she will return in what seems to be the second half of the next season. Ruby is a tricky one to dissect. I like Millie Gibson. I think she's a very natural actress. Her best, for me, is 73 Yards. I really like her in that episode. But as an overall package, there's a lot to be desired with Ruby Sunday. Whilst her personality is one I can get on board with, it's one that I feel very cozy with in the episode she's in. As an overall character journey, as an actual narrative, it leaves a lot to be desired, and her arc culminating with Sutekh and Empire of Death is very, very disappointing, and the way they handle her orphan stuff with her real mum at the end of the season and her exit, it's extremely hollow and underwhelming and confusing and baffling in many ways. And it's a shame, because I feel like there was a lot of potential for Russell to create another generational companion out of this show, but he just didn't. And obviously, as I said, her run's not completely over, so there's still time to do more stuff. But as of right now, I am very disappointed by Ruby Sunday, but there are still positives. There are still things I really enjoy about her. As a friend to the Doctor, she's fun. She is an enjoyable person to have around, but it's just, again, as I said, there's a severe lack of character development, and her arc just is a bit of a clusterfuck. But it's not as volatile and crazy as some of the ones that Moffat and Chibnall did to me. But for now, I'm going to leave her in this spot. My number 39 is another hot take. It's Amy Pond, played by Karen Gillan. I really struggle as to where to place this character, because I feel Amy Pond has some of the best ideas in the show behind her character that Moffat created for her, but she also, in a lot of episodes, has some of the worst execution. She is the absolute definition of a volatile character. If we talk about, the positives, when I look at episodes like Amy's Choice and Vincent and the Doctor and The Girl Who Waited and the God Complex, there's so much there to love about Amy Pond. But then when I look at other episodes like the Hungry Earth two-parter and the Vampires of Venice and the Day of the Moon and the Flesh two-parter and Let's Kill Hitler, The Wedding of River Song, and especially stuff like Asylum of the Daleks and The Angels Take Manhattan, it just truly drives me insane and pisses me off. There's this pouty face that Karen Gillan does that just irks me, and I can't get along with it. It just really, it makes me not want to watch her. It's a very annoying thing she does, even if it's a small detail. This is also a bit of a hot take, but I think that Karen Gillan as an actress is quite mixed in Doctor Who. She certainly has a lot of charisma and charm, but when it comes to her real delivery and performance of certain lines, there's just moments here and there that I just, there's just bits and pieces that just aren't for me. It's not the kind of acting that I really enjoy. It just comes across as really, a bit sour in execution. Probably one of the most notable lines that I just don't care for is in The Big Bang, where she goes, "You're late for my wedding." And I understand the point of the scene, but it's just not for me. Not my kind of acting. We'll say, though, for the most part, Caitlin Blackwood does a pretty good job as young Amelia Pond. There's certainly some really positive moments there. So, credit where it's due. Number 38 is her husband, Rory Williams, played by Arthur Darvill. I find Arthur Darvill as a performer a lot more likable and consistent when it comes to his presence in the show than Karen Gillan's. Whilst he may not be as charismatic and have as much of a presence, there is a sort of an affability about Arthur Darvill's performance as Rory that makes him really likable. However, where I take issue with Rory, which I know is another hot take, it is controversial to say this, I just think Stephen Moffat's writing of this character is very inconsistent and drives me up the wall. The way that they pound into the ground his memeable trait of dying in resurrection, it gets to a point of insanity. The best example of it is the first time they do it in Amy's Choice. That's a great scene. I love that moment. But every time it happens after that, whether that be down to the execution of his actual death, whether that be down to the ridiculousness of his resurrection, or whether that be down to just the moment being wholly unnecessary in the first place, it just becomes stupid at points, and there's just a lot of things like smug moments. Smug Rory is one of the most irritating things that Moffat does with this character. It really just irks me, and I cringe every time that they do that with his personality. And yeah, Rory is a real mixed bag, but he is above Amy for me because I feel like Arthur Darvill as an actor is so good that he's able to save some of the downsides with Rory through his acting, whereas I think Karen Gillan, while she certainly has her positives as a performer, the poor writing really detracts from her character, and it's very difficult for her to salvage, as opposed to Rory, where I feel like Arthur always injects something positive out of it, which helps a lot to make him a likable presence in the show, even when Moffat is royally screwing him up. Possibly the worst they ever did with him was the Flesh two-parter. His characterization in that story is utterly terrible. I hate him in that story. But yeah, Rory Williams is, again, another volatile Moffat character. My number 37 is Nissa of Traken by Sarah Sutton. Difficult one, tough one to analyze. I think there's a lot of really interesting things surrounding Nissa. I love the Keeper of Traken. I think her exit story Terminus is severely underrated. I really like it. I think in season 20 she gets quite a lot of good stuff to do with her character, like in Arc of Infinity and in stories like Mordred Undead, and especially as I mentioned before, Terminus and Snake Dance as well. And there's bits in season 19 too where She has a few scenes with the Fifth Doctor that are really nice, like in The Visitation or in Black Orchid, where she plays a double role. And, you know, scattered throughout these bits and pieces where they utilize it interestingly, like in Fort of Doomsday, how she is an expert in botany because of her, you know, plant world. That's used in an interesting sci-fi way. But there's just there's little things about Nyssa that lets her down a bit. You know, something like her passing out for the entire of Kinder to then come back at the end because they just couldn't be bothered to have 3 companions. It's things like that where she almost feels always like the last priority among her own team of characters. I also think out of that Fifth Doctor era, Sarah Sutton, early on, like in season 18 and a lot of 19, she's not the strongest performer. She doesn't have as much charisma as Janet Fielding and Matthew Waterhouse, and certainly not as much as, say, Tom Baker or Peter Davison, or even Mark Strickson. I think that season 20 as an actress is where she shows her best sides, but there is certainly a sort of a, you know, not by mistake a tranquility to Nyssa that I both like, but I also think lacks something in some areas too. She's a bit of a mixed bag of a companion. I can enjoy Nyssa overall, but I just wish that they did a bit more of it on TV. Nyssa in Big Finish is great, though. Don't get it twisted. She is awesome in Big Finish. TV, she's fine. Pretty decent. Good match for Davison. You know, the quiet energy is there. She's different to the others, and as I said, I love the world building and her backstory, but just a bit lacking. There's a bit lacking with Nyssa, I think. My number 36 is Katarina, played by Adrienne Hill. Who only appears in, 5 episodes of the show, right at the end of the Mythmakers and then the first 4 parts of Dalek's Master Plan. I find Katarina fascinating as an idea for the character. The way that she worships the Doctor like a god idol and is so subservient to the idea behind him, and that leads to her inevitable death in The Traitors. She is so different and so out there, and kind of shows the anomaly of when you take a historical character who has such a warped understanding of how life functions because of the kind of society she's been born into, and take her into a completely out of water situation that she couldn't possibly comprehend. And then it leads to some really interesting and unique drama that no other character in the show has really been able to capture. I find Adrielle's performance and sort of almost deranged dogma behind the Doctor to be fascinating, and the bickering she has with Brett Vian as well is, again, it's just, she's a very short-lived character, but she's a very tragic character, and I find her fascinating despite her limited appearance in the show. My number 35 is Perry Brown by Nicola Bryant. Kind of similar to those Moffat ones, but again, such a mixed bag. I think Nicola Bryant is a very likable human being. When you see her outside of Doctor Who, she is a lovely presence. She has such a warm and caring and beautiful soul. But then again, sometimes I wonder if tacking the American accent onto her reduced her level of relatability, and sort of it hampered parts of her performance, because Perry's Americanization makes her quite obnoxious at points, even though she can be very likable. And I wonder if they had allowed Nicola Bryant to maintain at least some of her natural voice, that she would come across a lot more natural and a lot more agreeable, and sort of bring that soul out of her that she truly has, as opposed to the more sort of bravo, you know, American side, the New Yorker, the, oh, come on, Doctor, like that sort of grating side of the Americanisms that get a little annoying. They try to do something with that, with the Sixth Doctor being an elitist UK English corrector of, you know, vocabulary, compared to Bryant's very non-English Americanized way of speaking. And the bickering side of it has its moments, and it also has its detractions. Perry is fantastic with Peter Davison in season 21. I think she's exceptional in The Caves of Androzani, especially. And in that is one of the best examples of a very complex and interesting damsel that the show has ever done, because it doesn't rely on the tropes. It actually uses her to the story's advantage. I also think what they do with her in Trial of a Time Lord, apart from the Ultimate Foe, which we don't talk about, with especially, you know, the Mysterious Planet, but Mind Warp mainly, is extremely brutal, and it is nasty and tragic, but it makes her such a sympathetic victim to the story, and it gives us some of the most frightening and heart-ripping drama that the show's really ever had. It's quite a knife to the soul to see Perry in such danger and have her perception be that the Doctor has betrayed her out of his insanity. I also think that Perry has quite a few charming and really likable moments, and there is this build of the rocky ground being repaired throughout season 22, but unfortunately Time Lash kind of ruins that after the Two Doctors, because by the end of the Two Doctors you could start to see that whilst this sort of dynamic of Perry being the Doctor's prisoner is very strange and awkward and not done in a very, you know, earned or natural way, the friendship between them starts to blossom and reconnect and grow again, kind of similar to what it was with Davison. But as I said, Time Lash kind of shits on that. So yeah, there's a lot to like, I think, about Perry, but there's also a lot to dislike, and it's really annoying because I really want to love Perry, but I just can't because of the issues. There's also some scenes that are blisteringly cold and she's forced to wear like skimpy and very non-covered outfits, and I just feel concerned for her health and safety. That's all. My number 34 is Bill Potts, played by Pearl Mackie. Possibly a bit of another hot take, maybe. I know Bill in a lot of New Who fan circles is very popular. I can sort of see why. I just think... Upon rewatching Series 10 over the years, she has slipped a bit for me. I don't like her as much as I used to when I first watched it. I think Pearl does a pretty solid job, and there are certainly quite a few positives. And in the Moffat era, she stands out for being different to the other female characters in a lot of ways that I suspect he was noticing some of the criticisms and maybe wanted to give the show something a little bit different, which it worked in its favor. I like the student-teacher dynamic she has with Capaldi. I really like the scene in Thin Ice where she finds out that he has killed people in the past. I think that's a very powerful scene. And the idea of her being converted into a Cyberman after being shot, which was the Doctor's fault. Yeah, there's some great facets of that are truly interesting. And yeah, there's certainly moments in Series 10 where I really like her character. I think she has a lot going for her. But there's some things that I will say I just... not a fan with her character. And what, you know, while she can be enjoyable to some extent, she's not exactly, compared to other companions, just personally, one I would necessarily choose to hang out with first. You know, she's just not really my thing. Like, I don't really vibe with Bill as much as I do with some other people in the show. Just thinking of them as, you know, potential friends, I guess. But also there's things with her character, like some of the way they handle her rejecting men due to her lesbianism can be quite repetitive. I think it's a good idea. I just think that there should have been a bit more dynamic ways of incorporating that into the show with her character by, you know, coming up with more clever ways to utilize it as opposed to just doing a lot of the same thing most of the time. And I really don't like what they do in The Lie of the Land with her and her mum and everything. I think it's very silly and really devalues the reality of love and death. I also find the ending of The Doctor Falls with her and Heather, over time, I'm souring on it. Stephen Moffat's obsession with allowing his characters to live forever, by Series 10, I'm just done with it. I just don't want it anymore. Her making the ultimate sacrifice to save the Doctor and then dying would be tragic and not akin to a kids show, I guess. But it is what I would have preferred. Just someone who really likes when stakes are respected, when things like being shot in the chest and being converted into a Cyberman are taken really seriously. And to some extent it is, like the scene where she looks in the mirror and doesn't recognize her own face because of the Cyberman cover. It's things like that that work really well in her favor, but it's also just, there are aspects of Bill that leave a lot to be desired. I also think her characterization in Twice Upon a Time is a bit stupid and piss, and I don't like it. So yeah, there are positives and there are negatives, but I'm not massively at odds with Bill Potts. I think she's fine. My number 33 is Mel Bush by Bonnie Langford. Probably the most underrated aspect of Mel is Bonnie herself. I think as an actress, she is incredible. I really like the air of dynamic presence she adds to the character. I think her sense of humor is super fun and dynamic. I think her performances in RTD2 have been sensational. I've loved her appearances in the new run. I think Mel is a very likable person, but obviously the biggest issue with her is kind of what a lot of people have pointed out about how J&T handled her in Classic Who, and that is just the excessive shrieking. It's really reductive, and that is the main thing that really brings Mel down for me, is the chirpiness and the screaming of her character is just too much. It's something that should be reserved as opposed to abused for entertainment value, and it's a shame because apart from that, I actually think her character has some real positives that I like. I specifically think that a scene which is in an otherwise quite bad story, there's the scene where her and the Seventh Doctor realize who each other are in Time in the Rani is a great little scene. I really enjoy that. And, you know, stuff like Paradise Towers and Terror of the Vervoids, you know, there's a lot to like about Mel. Her start is quite different. It's very strange in the sense that you don't actually see her companion introduction story. She is shown through a vision of the future in the trail, which is really different, and it's not until you go to the expanded media that you really see that part of her run with Colin. Big Finish has done wonders for Mel. I really like her in the expanded media. And yeah, I think over time I'm really warming to her. I think I like her a lot more than the public did back in the day. I find her... I just find Bonnie really enjoyable as a performer, and that really helps Mel a lot. And, you know, the idea of her being a fitness instructor is fascinating. Carrot juice, carrot juice. But yeah, she can be a little bit much with the J&T. You must scream and be colourful all the time, which, you know, does harm her slightly. I really like her dynamic with Ncuti Gatwa. I think she has really good chemistry with him. It's a really strange, odd pairing because they're so different as people, and yet they work so bloody well. My number 32 is Harry Sullivan by Ian Marter. Harry Sullivan is an imbecile! I mean, look, he's not the deepest and most dynamic character of all time, but he is so fun. He is always at the butt of the jokes of Tom Baker, but I just think that it works. It's so just lovely to have that guy to bounce off Tom in a really bantery way. Like, especially I think in a story like Robot where he's completely trolling him. It's just some of the goofiest and funniest post-regen stuff they did in the show. And, you know, he's in some quite high-profile stories like The Ark in Space, Genesis of the Daleks, Terror of the Zygons. There's a lot to like about Harry Sullivan. I just think he's a really fun character. He's probably one of my favourite parts of Revenge of the Cybermen as well. I think Harry is so fun in that story. And yeah, and also just the noises he makes in like something like the Sontaran Experiment, just like the very gentlemanly, oh, 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 oh. You know, as I said, not a super deep character, but the fact that he's a general practitioner that kind of just gets brought along in the TARDIS with Sarah and Tom. He's just fun. He's an enjoyable presence. I really like Harry. When I say that can't be right. My number 31 is Ben Jackson by Michael Craze. Alright, me old China. Oh yeah, Polly. Doctor. What makes Ben so enjoyable is that Cockney man at sea persona he has. He is a lad. He is a lad's lad. I think some of my favorite utilization of Ben in the show is in The Power of the Daleks, when he is in serious doubt about whether Patrick Troughton really is the Doctor, because he represents a point of view that the audience will have felt at the time, given the fact that they are withdrawing from Hartnell, leaving the show, and he was the only one to play the character, and the idea of someone replacing him was hard to fathom. And yet Ben playing that role and giving the audience something to latch onto if they really doubted Troughton was fascinating. I also find his, the fact that he gets mind manipulated in the Macra Terror works exceptionally well. He's great in stories like The War Machines and The Smugglers and The 10th Planet. He really carries a lot of the action that Hartnell couldn't participate in. Ben is such a, just a fun guy. I will say, once Jamie comes on, because they share lines, it does kind of cut some of his presence in the show in half, and then eventually they'll phase him out and Jamie takes the that male companion role. But for when Ben is there and gets his time to shine, he is a fun character. And pretty damn consistent, I have to say. I think Ben is one of the ones that really there's no major issues or fumbles with him. He really is just a character that's used well in pretty much all his stories. I really like Ben a lot, actually. My number 30 is Susan Foreman by Carol Ann Ford. She's obviously the original companion, being the Doctor's granddaughter. Slightly mixed bag, though. I think some people are more harsh on her than she deserves. Like, yes, there is some of that damsel shrieking and uselessness that Carol Ann Ford left the show because she didn't like, and it was quite reductive and annoying at times, and she's very hysterical, and especially in stories where the microphones are really, they peak really poorly, like in Marco Polo, for example, the screaming gets to ear rape territory. But I think that criticism doesn't do justice to all of the great aspects of Susan's character. I love her friendship with Ping Cho in Marco Polo. I love her presence in something like The Sensorites, where she talks about Gallifrey preemptively. I love that scene. Her arc of growing out of her grandfather's shadow and sort of his controlling nature pushing her away, and then him realizing it by the Dalek invasion of Earth, is beautiful. I love the connection she has with Ian and Barbara. There's multiple facets of Susan that I find really enjoyable, and I think there are in some regards, she is quite underappreciated because in many ways, she's actually quite a good character, but it's often obscured by the more damsel-y elements that slightly harm her reputation as a character. Her cold-blooded psychopathy and insanity and the edge of destruction is also quite nice. And not to forget that Carol Ann Ford is a really, really good actress, especially given how young she was at the time. I think in the story An Unearthly Child, like the first episode that starts off the show, she plays a great mysterious role that really lures the viewers into the show. I think she's wonderful as a presence there. So yeah, I really like Susan, but, the shrieking is a little much. Kind of similar to Mel Bush. If they toned down that just a bit, she'd probably be a lot higher. My number 29 is Sarah Kingdom, played by Jean Marsh. Whatever the female equivalent of a Chad is, I'm not sure what the word would be, but whatever that is what Sarah Kingdom is. She is an absolute badass. But it's not in the sort of forced, cringy way that you'd think when you think of like a postmodern female badass character in some of those films that have come out recently that just kind of misunderstand the whole point of still humanizing these people. But Sarah Kingdom is that. She is an interesting character. She has a sensitive side in her heart. She has characteristics. She's multifaceted. And, the story with her and Brett Vine with being a brother and like how that dynamic fell apart. There's a lot to love. And she has one of the most disturbing and heartbreaking death scenes in Doctor Who. It's truly harrowing and horrifying. Jean Marsh is an incredible actress and she plays it to perfection. Sarah Kingdom is just so likable, and she only appears in Dalek's Master Plan, but for that saga of a story, what a role she has to play. She's so fun, she's so charismatic, she's so strong as a person, And as a story that has so much danger in sight, having a warrior like her in the story really works. And yeah, I really like Sarah Kingdom. I sometimes wonder what it would be like if she'd stayed for the rest of season 3, but then we probably wouldn't have gotten that death scene we got, you know, the last episode of Dalek's Master Plan, so it'd be hard to sacrifice that aspect. But yeah, Sarah Kingdom is a female Chad, and she's great. My number 28 is K9 by John Leeson and David Brierley. In a little bit of a way, practicality does get in the way of this character, kind of similar to Chameleon, though nowhere near as extreme. K9 is a very divisive character. You either love him or you hate him. I am on the positive side of K9. I think his dynamic with the Fourth Doctor is really fun. I think the smart little jabs and banter he does is really funny, and the way that the Doctor absolutely talks shit to him is so fun. And you know, yes, he is a character that in essence, he does serve the purpose of being something for the kids. One of the reasons why Adam hated K9, he mentioned that on his Worst Companions, that he really doesn't like K9 for that reason. But I actually really enjoy K9 for the most part. I think there's a lot of moments where he is hilarious, and it probably wouldn't work with other Doctors that well, depends on which one you mean. But with Tom Baker makes K9 just so much more fun than he probably deserves to be. Yeah, I think just the dialogue of the era really helps. You know, just that period of time. There's so much to like about the way that, you know, the charming little ways that K9 interacts with characters in the story. And there's so many things that I love about him. And one big highlight I can think of is when he has that fight with the robot bird in the pirate planet. I do love that. But yeah, K9 is enjoyable. I really enjoy it. He's cute in the right way, not in the wrong way. My number 27 is Vizsla Turlough, played by Mark Strickson. Whilst not perfect, I find the idea and a lot of the execution behind Turlough to be fascinating. That he starts out as a servant of the Black Guardian out to murder the Doctor, but then ends up siding with the Doctor. An episode like Enlightenment is one of the most interesting things they've ever done with a companion in the show, and the way that he chooses light over darkness and everything that comes into it, and the inner turmoil and struggle that Turlough faces in the Black Guardian trilogy, I think is greatly done. I also really like him in stories like Frontios and Planet of Fire. I think there's a lot of really cool things they do with him as a character. I like the sort of almost detached performance that Mark Strickson does as Turlough, and the way that he performs the role, and that is in a way that is very different to everyone else we'd had in the show, in the way that at any moment that he could turn his back on the Doctor, and there's a sort of almost tension at all times. And yet Turlough, as a character, you can see he really wants to reject that side of him and embrace, you know, siding with the Doctor, but there's always going to be that trauma from his past that really irks at him. And you know, there's a couple of episodes where he doesn't get too much to do, like King's Demons, The Awakening, and there's obviously that very meme-worthy moment in Warriors of the Deep, you know, the face of Deegan, he's drowned. So, you know, he doesn't have a perfect run, but there is a lot to like here, I feel. There's a lot of things about Turlough that really make me like him as a character and find him fascinating. My number 26 is Sergeant Benton, played by John Levine. I will admit that Sergeant Benton, a lot of the time, is a bit of a punching bag of a character, and he is one of the more simple-minded among the companions, but that makes him all the more charming. I love how him and the Doctor almost sniggering like little boys whenever they get a chance to make fun of their boss, the Brigadier. It just adds a little note to the show that just really adds something. He is great in action scenes, and I love the authority he brings to the role, but he's also got a softy heart, and he's super charming. The Demons is a big story for Benton. I feel like he gets a lot to do in that one, and he's a big highlight, and he's super fun and super funny. John Levine, as a performer in the show, he has this really charming presence, and he really, you know, he just brings this likable side to him, and he's almost like, if you were thinking in the medieval sense, he's a bit like a squire, but obviously in the modern day military. And yeah, I just love his, friendly banter with the Doctor and his tense but yet lovable relationship with the Brigadier within unit, and obviously his dynamic with the companions too. I think Sergeant Benton isn't inherently a complex or super developed role, but he is certainly a likable part of the show, and he has a lot of very fun moments. My number 25 is Polly Wright by Annika Wells. One thing I really like about the way Annika Wells plays Polly is that whilst she certainly has the damsel traits of some of the female companions that I have mentioned below her on the list, I think the way that Polly is handled within that framework shows some level of understanding of when not to push it too far. There is another example on this list much higher that I'll get to that I think perfects this strategy, but Polly has a lot going for her in that regard. There is a sort of a tension between her and both Doctors that really functions in a way that I really think adds a lot to the story. She's super likable with Ben and the War Machines, and she carries a story like the Smugglers and the 10th Planet. And contrast to Ben's, pessimism, she is really defending the Second Doctor and the power of the Daleks, and that is a much needed perspective to convince you of his legitimacy, that she sees him in good faith despite his weird behavior. I think the Highlanders is probably her best story. She gets so much great to do within it, and she really, has a genuine feminist role that I can really dig my teeth into and enjoy. And I also love her in the moon base with the Polly cocktail. And Annika Wells plays the role with such charm, but there's also this sense of almost classy diciness to her, the sort of almost the very skeptical, well, I don't know about that one, Ben. And, Annika Wells' accent is very funny, in the same way that Ben Jackson's Cockney accent is also very funny. But yes, I like Polly a lot, to be honest. I really enjoy her. My number 24 is a slight hot take because I know she's in a lot of people's top 10s or even top 5s, but it's Ace, played by Sophie Aldred. There's a lot of great characteristics to Ace. She is obviously a more masculine girl. She loves a bit of violence. In contrast to Mel that came before her, she's a very tough person. She gets very involved in the action, which makes her a great match for the 7th Doctor, who's a bit more cerebral and gets less involved in the violent sides of the show. I think her character development, especially in season 26, is exceptional. What they do with her inner conflict with her past and her parents, and that gets even further explored in Big Finish. I think Ace as an actual character, there's a lot to love about her, though I will say this might be down to some levels of direction or possibly just the performer herself, but Sophie Aldred's performance, whilst she certainly has likable aspects, she certainly comes across more like a CBeebies character than an adult drama character if we're judging based on a scale of extremes, and it does make her line delivery a little bit flaccid and wooden at points, which makes her a lot less convincing of a presence in the show at times. But when they get her right, even though she can be a little cheesy and a little simple and boulderish in the head, there is certainly a lot to love about Ace, and her attitude towards people and her sort of reckless naughtiness. Though she does kind of suffer the fate of being a character who acts a lot younger than her actual age, which is done a lot worse with Ryan Sinclair and Chibnall Who, but here it's still likable, but definitely not an ideal trait for me. It's not something that I particularly love. But yes, overall, I have very positive things to say about Ace as a character. I just think there are aspects of her performance that make her sort of a few notches below some of my real favorites that I think, in this show, there's been some truly wonderful acting from the companions that I think goes above Sophie Aldred overall, even though she gets, admittedly, a lot of very good stories to explore her character with. Like, for example, The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, where she's afraid of clowns, or like Battlefield, where they really test her ambiguous sexuality in the subtext. There's a lot of that going on. And yeah, I think Ace is rightfully praised, but not one of my top favorites, to be honest. My number 23 is really controversial because a lot of people think he's one of the worst. It's Eirich by Matthew Waterhouse. And yes, I understand why people hate him, because he is a little bastard of a guy, and he says some truly diabolical things like the sexist comments in Fort of Doomsday and his very sort of dodgy ideas around politics that are very much in contrast to the heart of the show. It takes truly sinking your teeth into his backstory and his origin to see how the corruptness within him manifested. Because once you look at his arc starting in Full Circle and going all the way to Earthshock, I think there's one of the most interesting tragedies within Eirich in the show. And I really like his dynamic with Peter Davison's Doctor. I think there is a constant tension between them that works brilliantly. I think that whilst, Matthew Waterhouse, when he was young, wasn't like a super duper crazy talented actor, but he has a likability, he has a level of charm to him as a person, and a sort of a cheekiness that shines through Eirich. I think in terms of concept and ideas and subtext, Eirich has some of the most interesting material to work with in the show, and I think his bitchiness as a guy in the show really adds something that I really like about Eirich within his character. I think there's a lot that he brings to the table that other people find a turn-off as a character, whereas I find it fascinating how destroyed of, how just personally and morally insecure and destroyed he is within, and how he lashes out on people immaturely, and how the Doctor has to cope with having someone like that on his TARDIS. I think Eirich is possibly the most underrated companion in the show, and he's fascinating, and I really like him. My number 22 is Mickey Smith by Noel Clarke. Obviously, I'm going to have to separate actor from the art, separate art from the artist in this regard, because obviously Noel Clarke has been highly alleged and accused of some very, very terrible things that I do not like at all. I think they are heinous, and he has some very, very deep issues. But judging him as an actor playing Mickey in Doctor Who, I think he's sensational. I think as a talent, he brings a lot to Mickey Smith as a character. The development he has starting in Rose and ending in the Age of Steel, and he comes back a few times after that, but really it's that arc that ends in Age of Steel where he goes to the parallel universe and sees his real purpose in life, and finally is able to start moving on from Rose and the Doctor, which was really much a thorn in his side, and it was eating him up and tearing him apart and damaging him. I think that there is so much great stuff to be said about Mickey as a character, and his performance in Boomtown as well, when he confronts Rose, is sensational. I love the emotion he brings to the role. I love the real, fiber of his character, and I also really like Russell's audacity with New Who to, have a black character in the show and to really, challenge the audience, and also not just make it a token bit of representation, but to really make Mickey a character that goes through a lot of shit and really has to face the world's, very subtle prejudice against him, like the fact that after a year of Rose disappearing, he is assumed of the crime given he is her boyfriend, and there is a racial undertone to that is quite disturbing, and it's fascinating, and it's cutting and challenging and politically charged. I think Russell really mastered doing what he does best with Mickey as a character, and he's not like a main character, but he gets some great moments. I also really like that moment when he kind of realizes that comparing himself to Classic Who in the dynamic that was there in the past, Mickey is the robot dog, he is the canine, and he is that he does need to realize that he's been treated that way and he deserves better. We are in a car. But yes, I think there's a lot to like about Mickey. A few issues here and there. The pairing with Martha in End of Time is very rushed. It probably would have been a lot better if he had featured in Torchwood and they'd built up to it. There's a couple of little rough edges. Overall, I really like Mickey as a character. It's just unfortunately The whole Noel Clarke situation has made it a tad, just a tad more challenging. Not impossible, obviously. It's still very possible to watch Mickey and enjoy his character, but I do have to kind of push the real life things into the back of my mind when I watch it to really sort of separate myself from those issues and just, get really invested in the performance that Noel Clarke brings to the role. My number 21 is Romana 2, played by Lala Ward. Yes, I will be separating the incarnations. Lala plays the role so charmingly. She just has this effortless ability to add something unique to the role, and obviously her chemistry with Tom is natural, obviously, because they got married at one point, but there is so much there. There's so much there with her character that just makes her such a fun presence within the show, and obviously her being a Time Lord as well. They really went, well, let's think, if we were to have a female character play a more sort of whimsical and fun and sort of dynamic role like a Time Lord would be, I think they definitely capitalize on that side of Romana a lot more with the second incarnation than the first, which makes her different, and that was a good choice to make the second Romana different from the first in some regard. And yeah, I really like her dynamic with the Doctor, and I think she does well with Adric and K9 as well. I think her dynamic with K9 is super, like their connection together just works super well. I will say there is a couple of little things about Romana 2 that I'm not the hugest fan of. I think any scene where she's in peril is a bit silly, and it's hard to take some of those scenes too seriously. There's also some meme moments like in the Leisure Hive when she goes K9. And also in unfortunately in season 18, which is an otherwise thematically really interesting season for me, because of Tom Baker and Lala Ward's nadir and their relationship, they don't share as much eye contact, which kind of cuts out some of the chemistry that the characters had in season 17, and it is a slight annoyance comparatively. But yeah, overall I really like Romana 2. I think she's fun and dynamic and interesting and different, and a lot of people will remember her fondly for good reason. I also think that in the comedic side of the show, I like that to balance off Tom's very, extroverted and fun-loving sense of humor, Romana 2 is a lot more underplayed, and she plays it a bit more dry and straight-faced, and that's very funny to me. She also has some really cool costumes, especially like something like City of Death or Sharda, for example. And she works so well with that Douglas Adams kind of dialogue. She really just performs it in a way that comes across amazingly. My number 20 is Vicky, played by Maureen O'Brien. Within the show, Vicky represents filling a void in the Doctor's life after he has to let go of his granddaughter. And the dynamic she has with the Doctor, Ian and Barbara and Stephen is so just infectious, and Maureen O'Brien has such a charm on her. She's one of the most likable actors to play a character in the show, and it's really hard not to just love her presence when she's around, especially in something like the Romans or the Time Meddler. She's just so easy to get along with, I find. I think the main issue I have with Vicky is that they cut out a missed opportunity, and that was to, instead of having her run away for love in the Mythmakers, which I think her exit in that is really forced and out of character, and I just don't like it. I would have vastly preferred if they had the traitor's death scene be Vicky's potentially instead of Katarina's. Because, whilst it works really well with Katarina being her unknown, the heartbreak of having Vicky die in the Daleks' master plan would have been a moment to never forget in the show. It would have been one of the most heartbreaking moments the show's ever done, because Vicky is so beloved. But unfortunately, John Wiles had other plans for her and fired her, even though she didn't deserve it and was great for the show. And Hartnell loved Maureen O'Brien. I also love her introduction in The Rescue. I think as a character, there's a lot of sympathetic sides to Vicky, and there's a lot to love about her, and how her, despite her tragic backstory, she still has a lot of optimism within her and a lot of childlike fascination that can be enjoyed. I guess if I was to nitpick, possibly some of the dialogue lacks a bit of nuance with her, and she can play it a little bit too flat, but it's small because, for the most part, I think Vicky is very lovable, very enjoyable in the show. My number 19 is Zoe Harriet by Wendy Padbury. I think there's no mistake that this was done as a contrast to Jamie. Obviously, Jamie being a Highlander from the past, Zoe being a mathematician from the future. They come from absolutely diametrically opposed parts of life. And having her be a geek whiz and sort of in the wheel and space, the way she's introduced as the sort of facts don't care about your feelings, Doctor, like that kind of thing as a start. And then once she meets the Doctor and Jamie, she starts to learn about subjectivity, emotion, and escaping that very autocratic and uncreative environment to really flourish her mental capacity and really grow as a person. I think Wendy Padbury is very likable in the role, and she plays off Fraser Hines and Patrick Troughton beautifully. I really like her in the Crotons and her dynamic with the Doctor and how they argue about maths. And obviously in the War Games, I love everything about that story, but she is one of the aspects that I love in the story. She's so much fun. Yeah, I think Zoe is just great concept for the character, great idea, had a good run, like the actress, just really good stuff, really fun dynamic with everyone in season 6. I also really like her in The Invasion with Isabella. Super funny, super interesting. My number 18 is Stephen Taylor by Peter Purves. I think his dynamic with Hartnell is one of my favorite Doctor Companion connections in the show. The way that they challenge each other and they almost have like a chat off, young versus old, is fascinating. Especially in season 3. I think Stephen is possibly the best thing about that season. He is an absolute diamond. Whether the story be great or not, he provides so much to it, especially in some of the darkest stories the show has ever had, like the Daleks' Master Plan, and especially the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, where he plays the main role while the Doctor is barely in it. Stephen is such a challenge to the show, and Peter Purves is an exceptional actor. He played the role amazingly well, and I just love the absolute forthright, argumentative side he brings to the show. And, he obviously has a lot of fun-loving and, very, cheeky sides to him as well, like in The Time Meddler especially. He has great chemistry with Maureen O'Brien. And it's not all perfect, some of the scenes in Galaxy 4 he gets given Barbara's bits, which are slightly off character, but it still can kind of work. But yeah, there's a lot to like about Stephen, and he is a highlight in pretty much all of his stories, and he gets some really funny moments like in The Gunfighters, where he's forced to sing, and it's absolutely hilarious. Yeah, I love Stephen. I think he's an exceptional character, and Peter Purves plays him awesomely. My number 17 is Leela by Louise Jameson. What I love about Leela is that we've already been conditioned to the Fourth Doctor, who is the most alien and difficult to relate to incarnation of them all, given how wild and insane he is. And yet Leela, as the character she is an even more fish out of water than he is because of her lack of understanding of Earth, especially in those stories. Leela in the show has some of my favorite moments, some of my favorite dynamics, and she's, a badass warrior. She has some great action scenes. She appears in some great stories, and she has some genuinely amazing lines and funny moments, and I love her in stories like The Sunmakers and Horror of Fang Rock and The Talons of Wing Chiang and The Robots of Death. Like, there's so many great little things about Leela in the show. The only thing, really, that lets down Leela and the why she's here and not like in the top 10, for example, because I do love Leela for the most part, is the invasion of time. I think she has one of the worst exits in the entire of Doctor Who, and probably the worst in Classic Who. It's a real disrespect to her character, and they completely shit on her and gave her an ending that was very out of character and undeserved. Which is a shame, because otherwise I think Leela is fantastic for the show. I really like her a lot. My number 16 is a character I think is really underrated, and that is Captain Mike Yates, played by Richard Franklin. I find him fascinating how in season 8 he kind of just slides into the unit family, and he slowly sort of grows on the audience as he goes on, and he sort of aids the Doctor in a way, and he provides a dynamic with the Brigadier that's a little bit more, you know, there is also tension with him the same way that Benton has tension with the Brigadier, but it's a lot less cute, and there's a little bit more flippant sarcasm and underhanded cheekiness to Mike Yates. I also really like that he plays more of a psychological and scientific role within UNIT as opposed to the more physical side of Benton, which makes them different. But the main reason why I love Captain Mike Yates is his character development over the course of his run, and that all culminates in season 11 when you get stories like Invasion of the Dinosaurs and Planet of the Spiders, which I think is some of my favorite stuff I've ever seen the show do with a companion. I think Mike Yates' turn away from the Doctor and the way that he kind of gets exiled from UNIT is exceptionally done, and I love what they did with him. I think Mike is a really fascinating character, and I love him. I think he's so valuable to the show in a creative aspect, and I really like the way Richard Franklin plays him as well. Rest in peace. My number 15. Oh, this is so disappointing because he used to be my number 1. It's Captain Jack Harkness, played by John Barrowman. And to get this straight, it's not just about the allegations against John Barrowman in real life, because even if when I separate art from the artist, there are things about Jack in the show that unfortunately weigh down on him, and the main thing that ruined him since I last did a list like this was when he appeared in the Chibnall era, specifically Fugitive of the Jadoon and Revolution of the Daleks. His characterization in those stories by Chibnall is utterly just, it shits on the character, and it really damages him massively. And it's annoying because in RTD1, I absolutely love Jack. I think John Barrowman is so charismatic and charming. I like the fact that they gave him his own show, and obviously Torchwood has some issues with Jack, but that's separate to him being a companion in Doctor Who. When he does appear, he gets some of the best lines. He has some of my favorite performances. He's exceptionally likable, and he does the flirtatious sexual side in a way that I really enjoy, because compared to someone like River Song, who does it in a way that really aggravates me, Jack's flirty side I find to be super charming and endearing, and I find it really, it really works for his character, as opposed to River, where I don't like it at all. And a lot of that may be down to the way that Russell T Davies handles this sort of thing compared to possibly Moffat. And I say that, but funnily enough, Jack debuted in the Empty Child Dr. Dances two-parter, which was written by Moffat, and he's great in that story. Yeah, it's strange. It's strange what's happened since, and kind of how my perspective on Jack has soured massively because of Chibnall mainly. But also, again, similar to Noel Clarke, it is just a shame, the whole thing with John Barrowman and how it kind of makes it slightly more difficult to invest in his performance in the show because of sort of what we know about his kind of behavior. It's not as extreme as Noel Clarke, which is good in some respects, but it's also bad in others because it's still the way that he just doesn't, he just doesn't take accountability for his actions is really disappointing. And I wish that John Barrowman was able to overcome this hurdle in his life and was able to clean up and really gain the trust of the fans back, because I think when Jack is written well, I think he's amazing, and that is shown in stories like Empty Child and Bad Wolf and Utopia and The Stolen Earth. There's so much to love about Jack in stories like that. So yeah, unfortunately he's gone down to number 15, which is still really high, but he's not my number 1 anymore, and that's a real shame. Fucking Chibnall. My number 14 is Romana 1, played by Mary Tam. Key to Time, that being season 16, is one of my favorite seasons of Doctor Who. In fact, in Classic Who, I think it's in my... I won't say exactly where, but it's really high up. I think it's one of the most underappreciated seasons in the whole show. I love the concept of that season. I love most of the stories, if not all of them. And I love Romana 1 in the season, I think her dynamic with Tom Baker is absolutely legendary. It's so funny and so much fire. And I like the way that she plays the driven straight side that Tom doesn't have, because Tom is so fed up with his duties to UNIT and the Time Lords that he just wants to have a holiday by this point. And the way that Romana is trying to keep him on track. Also, her dynamic with K9 works really well. I love her presence in almost all the stories. I think the only thing that you can maybe slightly critique about Romana 1 is that she is a bit of a damsel in most of her episodes, and maybe you could argue that it's slightly overkill. For me, it's not enough to really damage her. I think the positive far outweighs the negative in that regard, and the good stuff she gets is super unique and creative and interesting, and she's in stories like Ribos Operation, which I love, The Pirate Planet, which I love. I feel like Romana's best is The Androids of Tara, where she gets multiple roles, and I've said this before, but I think the Armageddon Factor is a really underrated Doctor Who story, and it gets a lot of hate that isn't deserved. The scene where Tom pretends to go insane to prove a point about ultimate power and Romana's learning curve experience, while, you know, sort of realizing why the Doctor detests the key to time. It's just such a great piece of story to be part of. And yeah, I think Mary Tam plays the role brilliantly, and there's some scenes with some truly wonderful dialogue between her and Tom Baker, and I absolutely love it. My number 13 is a character who is probably one of my most improved over the years. It's one that I used to hate, but I absolutely love her now, and that is Tegan Javanka, played by Janet Fielding. I think I used to find her abrasiveness grating when I first watched the Davison era, but these days, now that I've really gotten more of a grip on Janet Fielding and her performance and kind of the bombastic Aussiness of her character, I actually find her really lovable, and she's really, really grown on me. I will say there's a couple of things in stuff like Time Flight and Arc of Infinity that does hamper her character a little bit, but let's not forget, Tegan gets a very long run in the show, and she gets a lot of great material to work with. I think the sort of tragedy of her introduction in Legopolis, the way she loses her auntie, her bickering with Davison is wonderful. I like the way that she challenges him, because he is one of the softer and less convincing doctors, and Tegan is one of the strongest and most confident companions, and the way that they strike each other and yet it's filled with love and admiration for each other is such a gorgeous dynamic. I think the Mara stories are incredible for her. Kinder and Snake Dance are exceptional Doctor Who, and I love Tegan in those stories. And something like Earthshock, her reaction to Adric's death is absolutely exceptional. And, you know, all leading up and all the death and blood and damage and everything that she'd witnessed and had to go through in her run, that then leads to Resurrection of the Daleks, which her exit in is so well done. And it's one of those ones where you really feel the reason why she is so driven to go away, because she's just seen too much and she's been through too much, and the fun is gone, and it's, you know, that sort of playful and adventurous part of her soul that once was, it has been dissipated by all the horrors of all the places she's been to and all the deaths she's had to witness, and the way that weighs on the Doctor towards his end is awesome. I think Tegan is a fantastic character, and the fact that I ever hated her is unfortunate and cringe, because she's great. My number 12 is Liz Shaw, played by Caroline John. Restricted purely pretty much to season 7 outside of stuff like The Five Doctors and Dimensions in Time and Big Finish. We're talking about main sort of companion appearances. She is in season 7. However, season 7, in my opinion, is one of the best seasons of all time. I think all 4 stories are awesome. That being Spearhead from Space, Doctor Who and the Silurians, The Ambassadors of Death, and Inferno. And I think Liz Shaw is one of the best parts of all 4 of those stories. I think she is supremely intelligent, and the way she gets her way into UNIT is awesome. I love the way that she is so self-determined. I think the way that she challenges Pertwee and the way that he has his ego challenged by her, and the fact that she doesn't take it and she doesn't allow him to walk over her is so great. I love Caroline John's performance in the show. I think she does a fantastic job. And the only thing about her character that I don't like is that her exit is off screen in Terror of the Autons. That's really it, because apart from that, I think she's exceptional. I love Liz Shaw. I think she's an amazing character that was really short-lived, but we did get another character out of it, and I'll talk about her later. My number 11 is one of the most divisive characters in the show, and that is Rose Tyler, played by Billie Piper. There is obviously a sentimental value to this because Rose was my first companion I ever watched in Doctor Who. She is sort of the heart of the beginning of New Who, and she really, for a generation of fans, represented a lot for the show. But I understand that there is also a lot of people that dislike Rose. I feel that her selfish and unaspirational traits only add to her character rather than take away from them. I understand that that can make her quite aggravating for some people who get really triggered by those traits when they see them in people. But when you really look at the context of her story and, you know, the reason why she has these selfish traits, it makes up the mold of a really interesting and well done character. Her dynamic with Christopher Eccleston is exceptional. It's one of the most heartfelt and just amazing dynamics the show's ever done. I think the chemistry they have and the connection they have is one of my favorites between a Doctor and a companion that's ever been done, and they really push the boundaries of what kind of character drama you could do with two actors in a show like Doctor Who, bringing it back to the 21st century. I think Rose, for the most part in Series 1, is an amazing character, and so layered, and has so many justified reasons for why she does so wrong in so many ways, and why she ends up damaging so many other people through her actions, given, you know, her lack of fatherhood, her toxic relationship with Mickey, her low class status and low financial status, and her overall sort of apathy and depression with the modern world, and how, you know, her anxious attachment to the Doctor leads her to become very unstable, and she loses a lot of her morals because of how much she loves the Doctor and how much she depends on him to fill that void in her. But at the same time, she also has some great moments, like in the Satan Pit, when she leads that people away from the devil, and, you know, stories like The Empty Child, the Doctor dances her dynamic with Nancy, or in Tooth and Claw, she has a great connection with the lady in the cupboard. In The Girl in the Fireplace, her scene with Raynette, I love. And controversially, a lot of people really hate her dynamic with Sarah Jane, but I think the initial animosity that then turns into forgiveness and connection and understanding of what's happened in the Doctor's past and the risks that pose to her is really great for her character, and sort of waking up and realizing that. And there's big moments like in Dalek, she's fantastic, but her best ever episode has to be Father's Day. I absolutely love Rose in Father's Day. I think it's some of the best character work they've ever done with a companion in the show. It's just wonderful. Yeah, she's not perfect by any means, but I think Rose is great. When you really sink your teeth into there being a good reason for her to have some stinky personality traits, and you really focus on her as a character, there's a lot more interesting going on with her than meets the eye, I think, and I think that she gets a hard time justifiably for the most part. And I really like Rose. I think she's great. My number 10 is Victoria Waterfield, played by Deborah Watling. I could do a massive breakdown of why Victoria is such a great character, but to save a bit of time, I will link in the description a video that Will Maddox did about Victoria, and you can go watch that, because he does a fantastic job of explaining what's so great about her character. But to sort of sum up, I think what I kind of alluded to earlier about Polly, but this too being the ultimate version of this idea, I think Victoria is the ultimate subversion of the damsel trope in the show. Victoria is very much a character study of anxiety and trauma, willingness to try and take part in adventuring with the Doctor and Jamie because of not only her love for them, but also because she wants to be able to move on and have a life after all the devastation she felt. and the loss she has encountered. But then that all coming to a head in Fury from the Deep, and her having to leave the TARDIS out of needing to settle down for her mental health and to really, you know, process a lot of the damage that's happened to her in her life and really, you know, let it all go. I think it is a super underrated arc in Classic Who, and it in a lot of ways you could argue it's really before its time. Or was it maybe that TV back then was actually more layered than people give it credit for? I think Deborah Watling plays it really well. I think that they take some of the tropes that people complained about certain kind of female characters at the time, and they turn it into something super interesting. And her dynamic with Jamie and the Doctor is awesome. I think Victoria is one of the most fascinating characters that the show has ever done. And she has a great introduction and a great exit. And she appears in some of my favorite Doctor Who stories ever. Stuff like The Tomb of the Cybermen and The Enemy of the World and The Web of Fear and Fury from the Deep are all classics that I absolutely love. I love the way she tricks the Ice Warriors. I think that's hilarious. Yeah, there's so much to love about Victoria. I think she is exceptional and is one of my favorites. My number 9 is Martha Jones, played by Freema Agyeman. And I love Martha, but not in the way that Twitter loves Martha, because I feel the stan culture around Martha really obscures the reality of her story and what makes it great. The reason why Martha is great is not because she deserves to be loved, but because she is a sympathetic person who makes mistakes in the same way that the Doctor also makes mistakes. It is a dynamic that damages each other, but it also helps each other too. She's intelligent, she's competent, she's fierce, but also has a sensitive, tender heart. She is overwhelmed by her family and wants to escape, but escapes to a place that hurts her deeply because of her love and passion for a person that can't love her back, despite all the ways that he feels like he owes Martha, you know, a lot of credit because of all the amazing things she does for him and for people around. At the same time, the Doctor has a lot of issues at the time he meets Martha, and that creates a destructive dynamic between them in a sense. But unlike the really aggravating and just pitiful writing that Moffat does with Clara and the Doctor with their toxic dynamic, I feel the way Russell T Davies handles Ten and Martha is extremely interesting and is one of my favorite stories the show's ever done. Martha Jones also takes place in some stories that I think have some thematic excellence throughout, stuff like Gridlock and Human Nature and The Sound of Drums, that really explore things like faith and trust and words and what people really believe, and a lot of the political undertones. Her association with such intricate and developed ideas really helps her elevate her and give her a lot of great material to work with in the show. I think Martha is exceptional. And as I said, with Mickey, not perfect. Her connection with Mickey in End of Time is rushed and not as developed as I would have liked. But Martha as a whole is wonderful. I love her, and I think she is a fantastic character in the show. And having her face racism as a black woman and have it be a challenge in her way, to me, makes it very sympathetic. And I think the vitriol behind the feature of racism in the show that a lot of people online have shown towards the show is something that I just don't see eye to eye with. And I think the story is done really respectfully and handles it in a way that's real and understandable. And it only empowers Martha rather than destroying her, like some people say. So yeah, I think Martha is wonderful and amazing, and she appears in Series 3, which is one of, if not my favourite. My number 8 is Donna Noble, played by Catherine Tate. She's kind of like what I described with Tegan Javanka, but even more so. I think the connection she has with Ten is utterly perfect. David Tennant and Catherine Tate have probably the best chemistry the show's ever seen. It's hard to think of another one that's quite on the level. There is a few that compete with it, but it's one of the strongest connections the show's ever created. Donna is a force to be reckoned with as a character. She is so passionate and forthright in her beliefs, and she doesn't stand to be manipulated or taken down, which, when paired with such a flawed, egotistical doctor who's constantly battling with his hubris, she makes a perfect match for him, both with him, but then also seeing how distraught he is without her. That almost dependency that he builds for her, and then when that's taken away from him, the dark path that he's led down as a result of it, I think is fascinating. Episodes like Planet of the Ood and the Fires of Pompeii, Turn Left, and Forest of the Dead, we see some of the best of Donna in the show. She is truly a wonderful character, and Catherine Tate plays her with such charm and cheekiness, and there's so much to love about her dynamic with Wilfred. And an episode like Wild Blue Yonder, Catherine Tate absolutely knocks it out of the park as Donna in that too. I do think that there's a couple of little moments that are a little bit fucky with Donna in episodes like The Runaway Bride and The Star Beast, and a couple of others like The End of Time. There's a few things with Donna that are a little bit disappointing in execution. Journey's End slightly as well. There's an aspect of that is a little bit off with the climactic point that is more complex than people let on. That being said, not to forget, the moment when the Doctor is forced to wipe her memory in Journey's End is a harrowing experience. This is not a hot take, this is a common take. I think Donna is one of the best the show has ever done, and she is a pure embodiment of Russell T Davies' ability to craft people in such high volume of character. And yeah, I love her. My number 7 is Sarah Jane Smith by Elizabeth Sladen. Elizabeth Sladen is one of the most lovable people that the show's ever had. Not only is she so charismatic and energetic and brings so much warmth and love to the show, but she's also not a pushover. She is, quite fierce at points. She's intelligent, and she has an interesting balance of professional and personal side, because as a professional journalist, she is super investigative and interesting, but on her more personal side, she is quite emotionally sensitive and holds back a lot of her true thoughts. I find her dynamics with both John Pertwee and Tom Baker to be lovely. I think she has a different connection with either. With Pertwee, it's more of a friendly, jiving banter and a professional connection that leads to strong admiration and mutual love of each other, and sort of the care that they have for each other's livelihoods and, their presence together. And her intelligence and her feminist ideologies are super, super well done. And then, of course, with Tom Baker, it becomes a lot more personal, a lot more sensitive, and because of Tom's aloof nature, it becomes a dynamic with so many more layers and so many intricate and well done moments of both connection, but also them coming apart slightly as well. I think the passion that Sarah Jane and the Doctor have for each other is super earned and well done. And she also appears in some of my favorite Doctor Who stories of all time, stuff like The Time Warrior, Invasion of the Dinosaurs, The Ark in Space, Genesis of the Daleks, Planet of Evil, Pyramids of Mars, The Brain of Morbius, The Seeds of Doom. And there's just so much to love about her exit in The Hand of Fear. I think it's so masterfully done, and it's just such a wonderful and restrained performance. And not to mention the fact that she's come back in stuff like The Five Doctors and School Reunion and, The Stolen Earth, and she's gotten her own spin-off with the Sarah Jane Adventures. And yeah, Sarah is a legend, one of the best of all time. I love her. My number 6 is Barbara Wright by Jacqueline Hill. I think that there is an argument to be made that she has had the most impact on the Doctor's character journey compared to any other companion, because the way that she influences Hartnell and changes him over seasons 1 and 2 is astronomical. And You know, the disdain that he has towards Barbara at the start of season 1, and then the absolute heartbreak he has letting her go in the chase near the end of season 2. It's just such a great journey, and everything in between is just wonderful. Barbara gets some truly exceptional stories to work with her character, like the Aztecs and the Crusade, and some real fun moments, stuff like the Romans. She's awesome in. I love her in that story. And everything in between, you know, she's so just dynamic, and Jacqueline Hill plays her so well. And, you know, obviously the performance is of its time and very stagey, but it brings so much humanity and life to the performance of the character. And I just love Barbara. I think she is a wonderful presence in the show. I think her dynamic with the First Doctor is generationally great. Her dynamic with Ian Chesterton is just beautiful. I love their connection. And her dynamic with characters like Susan and Vicky also works amazingly well. The fact that she is a history school teacher, but she also has so much to offer as a person with passion and empathy and heart at the same time, but is also willing to take risks and play the game smartly to evade the dangers of time, and how many men out there are out to try and get her and abuse her, and the way that she's able to overcome all those horrible odds. I think Barbara is just a force in the show, and I love her dearly. My number 5 is the lovable Jo Grant, played by Katie Manning. Admittedly, a lot of this has to do with the actress, because Katie Manning is one of the most lovable and affable and just adorable people I think I've ever witnessed in life. She brings so much warmth, heart, and emotion to the role of Jo Grant. But it's not just performance, because as great as Katie Manning is, it's also the writing. The characterization that Terrence Dicks gave her over the course of seasons 8 to 10, and the arc she goes on growing with Pertwee, the way she's undermined at first, but then really develops and sort of finds her strength, but then by the end realizes that she needs to leave and live her life of her own, and the hole that leaves in the Third Doctor going forward, and how that really tears him apart. Not only the character, but it seems like John Pertwee was really hurt by losing Katie Manning too. I think Jo is brave. She will take any risks if it's for the greater good. Sometimes she fumbles into danger unnecessarily because of her good intentions, and that makes her really admirable. And I think her dynamic with Roger Delgado's master is also amazing. I love their connection. I love the link she has with the unit family, like the Brigadier and Benton and Yates. She is constantly undermined as a woman, but she is so sympathetic in that role. She's funny, she's cute, she's just a lovely character, and just so infinitely warm and tender, and I just want to hug her at all times. She's exceptional. My number 4 is Ian Chesterton, played by the late great William Russell. I mentioned before with Barbara and dynamic with the Doctor, and whilst Ian may not change as much about Hartnell as Barbara does, the challenge he presents to the Doctor in the stories are always captivating. I love so much of what they give Ian to do in these stories. The fact that he is a science teacher and yet he is such a brave badass of a man. But it's done with purpose. It's done with drive. It's done with interest. He's hilarious, but he can also be very appropriately serious. His sort of whole thing in the Aztecs of knowing the nerve hold is exceptional. I think some of his best material he gets to do is in the Daleks, when he gives the speech about there is a time to drop pacifism when lives are at stake, when you could save those who can't defend themselves. It is a sign of bravery, and it kind of gives that, you know, the first season of the show, that very post-World War II morality. And I think it's a fascinating perspective that Ian adds to the show. There's episode like The Crusade where he goes on a mission to save Barbara, and it's so admirable. There's funny stuff like in The Romans where he's super charming and fun. I love the connection he has with all the characters around them. William Russell as an actor is top-notch. I think he brings so much to the role of Ian. He's an utter Chad. And like I said with Barbara before, the exit in the chase is just such a heartwarming moment, and it's just a lovely end to these characters. And yeah, I love Ian. He's one of the greats, one of the greatest companions of all time. My number 3 is Jamie McCrimmon, played by Fraser Hines. This one's a bit of a no-brainer. Jamie and Troughton are inseparable. He is the most loyal dog of a pet the Doctor has ever had. He's tenacious and bold, but he's also a bit thick in the head. He doesn't understand cultural norms or the kind of, manners around women that you'd expect from someone of the modern age, which makes him a bit of a contentious character, but it also makes him charming in that respect, because his sexism is always met with a defense that he's always proven wrong by the women around him, and it's always just very satisfying to see him, be kind of almost taken up on his insults. I love his sense of humor. I love his affable charm. I love his sort of lightheartedness, and the fact that he loves to travel with the Doctor. He just has so much fun, and he loves the TARDIS, and he loves the ability to go out and see things. And I love the little quotes he has, like, "Look at that beastie," and just like the Scottishness of him. I think he appears in some of my favorite Doctor Who stories of all time. Stuff like the Moon Base and the Macra Terror, stuff like Tomb of the Cybermen, Enemy of the World, Web of Fear, Fury from the Deep, stuff like the Mind Robber, the Invasion, the War Games. There's so much lovely material with Jamie. He gets great action scenes, he gets great dialogue. Fraser Hines is so likable. His dynamic with Troughton is unreal. The point in The Evil of the Daleks where he feels like him and the Doctor are on different paths is fascinating character drama. His dynamic with Victoria and Zoe is great. I love both of those perspectives. And Jamie is just this iconic role that is just so easy to love and so just funny and charming. And whilst he doesn't necessarily change a lot, he doesn't evolve a lot as a character over his 3 seasons, I think him being that constant presence, and after he opens up, after a sort of early Highlander part to play, he is just this constant enjoyable factor in the show, and the banter and the fun antics in an adventure show like this is just so exceptionally fun and wonderful. And his chemistry with Patrick Troughton is one of the best in the show. It's talking before about, David Tennant and Catherine Tate. I think this definitely gives it a run for its money. I think you could argue that Troughton and Hines is the best dynamic the show's ever had. It's wonderful. I love Jamie. Most people do, and I do too. Jamie's so fun. My number 2 is Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, played by Nicholas Courtney. This was so close to being my number 1. I seriously considered it, because I think when the Brigadier is at his best, he's one of my top 5 characters in the show, and that includes incarnations of the Doctor in there. I love the Brigadier. I love Nicholas Courtney. His performance is so charming, so charismatic. When you get stories like The Web of Fear, The Invasion, Season 7, and especially Inferno, when he plays the brigade leader, we bring out some of the best performances and writing and character the show has ever had. In stuff like The Mind of Evil, he's great. In stuff like Terror of the Autons and The Claws of Axos and The Demons, the Brigadier adds so much to the show. I just think that there's a reason why he's so remembered, because he challenges the Doctor in a way that I feel like no other character does, and the Doctor being forced to take a job with UNIT and have the Brigadier as his boss is such a funny and wonderful realization for the show to do. And the tension that the Doctor and the Brigadier have is awesome, but also the friendship and the lovability between them is equally fun. I also think Nicholas Courtney is a great comedic actor as well, and there's so many fun, light-hearted moments of the Brigadier over the years, especially in the later parts when the Doctor and the Brigadier get closer. There's a lot more banter, and it's not as tense. I think the only reason why I feel like I can't put him at number 1 is because there's just that little thing about occasionally in the Barry Letts seasons, the Brigadier is slightly, ever so slightly made fun of, just a little bit too much. And when you compare that to his early appearances from like seasons 5 to 7, where he's absolutely perfect, it is a noticeable change, and it is slightly, ever so slightly worse in execution, because I feel maintaining all of that depth is really crucial to the prestige of his character. And I think they get away with it, but to put him at number 1 when that sort of bug is in the way of his character is tricky. And I did consider, overlooking it, but I think just to be fair, in comparing and splitting hairs between these characters at the top, as much as I love the Brigadier and as much as I love what the great things they do with his character, just wish they'd maintained a little bit of seriousness in seasons 10 to 12. Well, so I guess it's technically 10 to 13 because he's in Zygons as well. And yeah, it's not perfect, but the Brigadier, for the most part, is a legend. He's so lovable, such a great part of the show, and yeah, he's very near and dear to me. And my number 1 is Wilfred Mott, played by the late, great Bernard Cribbins, who passed away a year or two ago. It wasn't particularly easy to really lock him down as my number 1, because when you really think about it, Wilfred isn't a full-time companion. He doesn't do lots of traveling in the TARDIS like Jamie, for example. And he is effectively more of a side character that is attached to Donna Noble rather than his own companion. But I think what allows me to really consider him legitimate in that regard is the role he plays in The End of Time, combined with Series 4 and that little cameo he has at the end of Wild Blue Yonder. Bernard Cribbins plays this character to perfection. He is one of the best things about why Tennant is my favorite Doctor, because in Series 4 in the specials, Wilfred, as that guiding piece in the Doctor's life, adds such a crucial aspect. And some of my favorite scenes in the show involve the two of them together. Stuff like in Journey's End when he says to the Doctor, every night I'm going to go up on that hill, I'm going to look at the stars and think of you. Or like when Wilfred says, I'm an old man, Doctor, I've had my time. And the Doctor decides to save Wilfred in that moment. It's just some of the most powerful drama that the show's ever done. It's some of the most wonderful character work I've ever seen in television. It's one of my favorite performances I think I've ever seen in anything. I think Bernard Cribbins as Wilfred is genuinely perfect. He was born to play this role. And not only that, but he's so fun. He's so hilarious, charming, wonderful. Like in Turn Left, when Donna walks into the house and Bernard and Wilf is enjoying that time with the Italians that they're living with, and it's just so adorably granddad. And like that scene in Partners in Crime, like he's been spending the whole time wishing that he could bring Donna back with the Doctor, because he knows that Donna would love to live a life of travel and see the stars that he could never see, because he always dreamed of being an astronaut. And that moment when it's just a moment of pure love and empathy that Wilfred has for people, that he doesn't have to experience things himself. He wants to see the best for the people he loves in his life to experience things. And that means just as much to him as experiencing them for himself. And seeing Donna with the Doctor in the TARDIS and seeing, that's Donna! That's my girl! And just like jumping for joy and screaming and dancing. It's just some of the most lovable and heartfelt stuff the show has ever done. But also he has pride in himself as a person and self-respect. You know, the way he says, I'm Wilfred Mott. when he talks to the Doctor, he says, you know, he will not be disrespected even by someone he loves dearly. And you take that gun, sir, and you kill the Master and you save those people. You do not put him above them. He is passionate and he believes in what he believes in, but he has trauma from his time in the war. Bernard plays him perfectly. Russell writes him perfectly. His impact on the new Who Doctor is probably one of the most impactful companions that the show's ever had, probably in the top 5, up there with people like Barbara and Sarah. I think Wilf is, for me, the greatest companion the show's ever had, and he's barely a companion, but as a character, he's just wonderful, absolutely wonderful, and his legacy hasn't been tarnished. And that scene at the end of Wild Blue Yonder, where after everything that the Doctor and Donna went through, to have the Doctor see Wilf once more, and for that to be Bernard's last scene before he passed away, I could cry. I'm not going to, but I could. I love Wilf. He's my number 1. Tell me what you thought. What are some of your favourite and least favourite companions? What did you think of my list? Hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you all tomorrow for the finale of the Advent Calendar for 2024, that being day 25. I hope you are all enjoying your festive season. I bid you adieu, a good night, and a good bye, bang.